minutes. Everybody having a great week. It was gorgeous out today. Did you guys get out on the quad, play some hacky sack? I'm just kidding. I know people don't do that anymore.
Okay, you guys. Oh, I also just wanted to let you know that we are going to be streaming live on YouTube today so that the public can watch with us. So
just wait a couple more minutes. Yeah. Everybody having a great week. It was gorgeous out today. You guys get out on the quad, play some hacky sack? Why is that coming now?
Oh, sorry.
You hear that? It's coming back to me now. Oh, because you've got your streaming. Oh, that's what I sound like, huh? Okay.
Yeah, it was the YouTube coming back through my microphone.
I'm glad it wasn't a delay on me. So it's 6:32. So thank you for turning on your video while we've gathered. You can now turn off your video and we will just see your names. And be sure to mute yourselves. I think you are muted. I don't hear anybody. I want to remind everybody to please take notes during the lectures. This is going to help in your writing of your essay. And after the artist presentation, you'll be able to enter the questions that you have into the chat. I've asked you all to prepare some questions in advance, but be mindful that if you're asking a question that has obviously been covered in the lecture, you may want to think of a new question. And also another reminder to turn your papers in next Wednesday by midnight on Blackboard. If you have any problems, either writing the essay, submitting it, anything else, just email me. You all should have my email. Any problems? Okay, so I'm going to turn the floor over to my colleague, Jess Posner, who is teaching the Art and Activisms course, and she will introduce our two guests this evening. Jess, is there anything else I can do to facilitate right now?
I think we are good. Thank you so much, Holly. We really appreciate you holding the space and introducing for us and everything else. So thank you so much. And I just wanted to say hello to everybody. Welcome to everyone in the VALS class, also in the Art and Activism class, and also to everybody that is out there watching on YouTube. Though it's totally weird to be doing these lectures online. Usually we do them in person in one big lecture hall. One of the cool things about doing them this way is that people from around the globe can watch and participate with us. So I just wanted to say welcome. It is my privilege and pleasure to introduce our guests today, Cassils and Rafa Esparza, the two lead artists of the large-scale, ambitious, collaborative, in plain sight public activist art initiative. One of the reasons I'm so excited to introduce these two artists is because this semester, for the first time, the School of Art has chosen to curate the Visiting Artist Lecture Series around a theme. That theme is art and activism. Not only are we focusing on this broad theme, but we are doing so in a way that offers a closer look at a few of the incredible artists that Cassils and Rafa invited to collaborate on In Plain Sight. I personally feel very humbled and grateful to present and teach the work of these living artists in this moment of great pain, suffering, grief, precarity, and reckoning. I trust and know that their offerings will reflect and inspire contemplation, resiliency, feeling, joy, and action. Cassils and Rafa are going to tell us more about their project in just a second, so I want to take a minute to introduce them as people and artists, as they both have individual art practices that I highly recommend that you check out too. In addition to co-curating the series, I currently co-teach the Art Activism and Modernity class with Cassils, which Rafa visited this week, and it was amazing. I first met Cassils in 2016 when we co-taught an atelier sculpture class at SU, in which we worked with a small but fierce group of grads and undergrads in the foundry, pouring bronze to create a monument which has since traveled across the United States. It is called The Resilience of the 20%, if you want to check it out. It was a beautiful, challenging, meaningful, and magical alchemical experience that I'm sure none of us will ever soon forget. Cassils and I have worked together over the years since then, through thick and thin, and they are one of my favorite people. It's a true privilege to introduce them to you all here today. Cassils is a transgender artist who makes their own body the material and protagonist of their performances. Cassils' art contemplates the histories of LGBTQI+ violence, representation, struggle, and survival. For Cassils, performance is a form of social sculpture, drawing from the idea that bodies are formed in relation to forces of power and social expectations. Cassils' work investigates historical context to examine the present moment. As a trans person navigating the US immigration system, they have glimpsed firsthand the unjust, meritless, financially motivated, bigoted, and dehumanizing nature of the US immigration system. I first met Rafa in North Adams, Massachusetts, where he had a beautiful exhibition of painting in Adobe on view at Mass MoCA. I can still smell it and feel and hear the way the space changed, the way it welcomed and held you as you walked from the wood and polished concrete floors of the building and into Rafa's installation, where the floors were paved with Adobe. The white institutional walls held stunning paintings on what I remember to be fragments of Adobe wall. I was fortunate enough to meet him then too, and we shared barbecue around this little tiny table at a time when block parties were still a thing. I felt certain that we'd meet again, and I'm so thrilled that we have in this context. He visited our class earlier this week, and it was such a pleasure and a gift for our class. Rafa is an artist who lives and works in Los Angeles. His work often takes the form of physically exhaustive performances and installations constructed out of Adobe bricks. Esparza also frequently works with collaborators, including family members. He has exhibited in several public parks, nightclubs, sidewalks, galleries, and museums in Los Angeles and internationally. So without further ado, I now turn things over to Cassils and Rafa.
Good afternoon, everyone, or good evening. My name is Rafa Esparza. Thank you for attending our presentation at Syracuse University's Visiting Artist Program. We're thrilled and honored that SU gave over their entire Visiting Artist series to artists behind the In Plain Sight Coalition, just an ongoing massive public artwork which took place over the 4th of July weekend. And will continue as we approach the upcoming election, which works to abolish immigrant detention and the culture of incarceration in the US. Never have we had such a large megaphone to speak to power. Never had the boot of power so quickly and decisively attempted to come down on our necks and silence us. But we're still here. We have not been silenced. And we virtually stand before you, honored to be asked as visual artists to take over this series. Today, we share some of these tenets that we experienced and thrive to model our experience of struggle, organizing, collaborating, serving, and supporting. All of which strongly intersect with the guiding principle of SU's model, which is to teach a generation of artists, those who are adventurous, complex, precious, innovative, reflective, curious, socially conscious, and dedicated to a life in the visual arts.
We'd like to thank the School of Art and the College of Visual and Performing Arts, my fellow artist and friend and co-professor Jess Posner, who's co-teaching the Art and Activism class here with me here at SU this fall. This is going to be a symposium style class where we're going to dive really deeply into each of the VALS art practices, try on their conceptual and formal tactics, and learn tools for resistance. I really want to give a special thank you to Sam Van Aken for initiating this partnership with In Plain Sight, and for being part of this artwork, for supporting us without a second thought. It's this kind of solidarity and trust that is a strong driving force behind In Plain Sight. We'd also like to thank Holly Greenberg, Emily Dittman, Bob Wayasaki, and Joanna Spitzer for supporting us. Thank you to all the many In Plain Sight artists and organizers who will be participating in this VALS lecture series. And our presence here marks part of a larger unprecedented integration of this art project into school curriculums, both here at SU, but also at Occidental College in LA, where through artist talks, workshops, and performances, we'll be integrating our efforts and ideas and labor into 15 different courses across 5 separate schools. This is part of an exciting experimental newly proposed national model where artwork is the center of pedagogical practice across several disciplines. And last but not least, we'd like to thank the entire In Plain Sight artist team who've been working tirelessly to manifest such an ambitious work and whose initiatives to bring visibility to the plight of immigrant communities and detention. We'd like to thank our docuseries film team, PJ Raval and Faria Zaman, our impact team, Lina Srivastava, Rebecca Lichtenfeld, and Set Ronquillo Hernandez, our media manager, Charles Hickey, our web team, Matt Dunnerstick, Timara Link, our 80 amazing artists, activists, and organizers that contributed their beautiful phrases that flew over the sky on the 4th of July weekend. Also, our powerful curatorial duo of programming and partnership, Kyle Stevens, Paulina Lara, and finally, we'd like to thank our 17 national organizational partners whose tireless work has been the focus of our amplifying efforts and for whom we proudly stand in solidarity with. Thank you.
So my name is Rafa Esparza. I'm a first generation born in occupied Tongva land, presently known as Los Angeles. And my parents migrated up to the States from Durango, Mexico as teenagers, escaping poverty, seeking opportunities for a sustainable future for themselves and the family that they'd eventually built here in the States. They charted unknown territories, cultures, peoples, and a system unbeknownst to them that would attempt to rob them of their dignity and exploit them of their labor. I'm indebted to them for giving me an opportunity to have a chance at an education, to live a life where I can make choices and imagine a world beyond circumstances of my reality. My work is dedicated to their journeys of struggle, their triumphant survival, and celebrates them thriving amidst the obstacles of racism and xenophobia institutionalized in the US. And so my work is deployed through a practice invested in building relationships through a variety of embodied investigations of space, material, and systems of power. Performance as my preferred form of inquiry can be seen as like a mapping, a cartographical project that charts how I've navigated Los Angeles, my birthplace as a resident, a student, a worker, and now in different cities and different countries, engaging culture as an artist. Positioning myself versus the spaces I work in turn reveal and unearth from them underlying and oftentimes invisible narratives where their function, their history, potential futures, and power dynamics all intersect. The commonplace racism and exclusivity within cultural institutions has informed my relationship to art as being a Eurocentric import that informs how we make and experience culture, and such that I prioritize access as an important intention in my work. Taking my work out of traditional art spaces that in favor of public sites where I can address a physical location directly and where the people that frequent these spaces become the intended audiences for the work has been a generative and productive strategy in my thinking around these concerns. I put a link in the chat. It's a link to a video of this performance that I'm gonna describe. You can keep the volume down, I'll just speak over it. It's called Bust, a Meditation on Freedom, a performance where I took to the Men's Central Jail, the Twin Towers Correctional Facilities here in downtown LA. It's the largest in the country, to stage an action directed at the materials and architecture of confinement. I was prompted by the flooding viral images of young Black men being slain at the hands of police officers, as well as my own relationship to the LAPD. Having been routinely racially profiled as a teenager and into the present as an adult, I've been pulled over, harassed, handcuffed for absolutely no reason. And out of my 5 male siblings, I remain the only one that hasn't been arrested. I staged this performance where, with the help of my family and friends, I ensconced my body in concrete up to my chest and then proceeded to bust my way out of it using a hand chisel and hammer. The form references the historical canon of portraiture, but herein intervening in its legacy by supplanting a traditional subject, a white masculine body with that of my own, brown, queer, a body consumed to be profited off of by the prison industrial complex. And so the portrait also extends beyond the bust into my surrounding environment, revealing aspects of the jail. such as a roll call of names recited through speakers that spilled into the streets, intended to inform visitors of imprisoned relatives' arrival into the meeting kiosks. A list of mostly Spanish surnames is projected into the streets, a reminder of who it is that's kept in confinement, a different kind of portrait of bodies like mine, caged within the concrete wall of the men's central jail. Published in February by Architectural Record, an article regarding federal building architecture stated that it had obtained what appeared to be a preliminary draft of an order under which the White House would require rewriting the guiding principles for federal architecture issued in 1962 to ensure that the classical architectural style will be the preferred and default style for new and upgraded federal buildings, entitled Making Federal Buildings Beautiful Again. The draft order argues that the founding fathers embraced the classical models of democratic Athens and Republican Rome for the capital's early buildings because the style symbolized the new nation's self-governing ideals. Never mind, of course, that this was a prevailing style of the day. It's precisely these ideals, the laws, and the rhetoric of the current administration, and the legacy of white supremacy and colonialism that was the focus of my address in the performance I recently staged at the White House. The performance was titled Bust, Indestructible Columns, and it entailed ensconcing my body in a concrete replica of an ionic column like those lining the porticos of the White House. And one set proceeded to break my way free using, again, a hand chisel and hammer. Addressing the neoclassical architecture that currently houses 45's administration, whose unabashed hate mongering has had violent ramifications impacting the health, the livelihood, and the safety of immigrants detained and mistreated within the confinement of hundreds of immigrant detention centers in the country. We have witnessed as of late also how his rhetoric has inspired violence and hate speech amongst his supporters, who have turned vigilante, organized pro-Trump rallies, and enacted violently against Black people and protesters. The values upheld and reified by these architectures, like colonial monuments that remind us of the colonizer victors of wars, of national wall prototypes that emblazon imaginaries of divisions in the masses, and the literal physical places of detention and incarceration. These are all places and symbols synonymous with power and fraught with the legacy of white supremacy and patriarchy. It's this legacy upheld by 45 that BUS proposed we collectively to break from.
My name is Cassils, and I'm an artist working in performance, film, sound, sculpture, and photography. I'm a transgender artist who makes their own body the materials and the protagonist of their performances. My art contemplates the history of LGBTQI violence, representation, struggle, and survival. And for me, performance is a form of social sculpture, drawing from the idea that bodies are formed in relation to social powers and societal expectations. My work investigates historical contexts to examine the present moment. I was motivated to make IPS as a trans person who navigated the US immigration system. And during my 17-year fraught path to citizenship, I have glimpsed firsthand the unjust, meritless, and financially motivated, bigoted, and dehumanizing nature of the US immigration system. I'm now gonna talk about a work just to kind of set it up. This is one of my earlier works called Becoming an Image. In this work, I unleash an attack on a 2,000-pound clay block, delivering a series of kicks and blows in total darkness. In this performance, I am unable to see in the darkness. I am blind, as is the audience, as is the photographer as he attempts to frame and document me. The only time anyone can see anything is when a photographer attempts to capture my image. Pressing on the button of the camera, my frenzied attack is illuminated in the bright, searing flash. This temporary burst of light burns the image into the viewer's retina. Effectively, everyone present has a still image hovering in their eyeball long after the moment has passed. Everyone becomes a living archive in that moment. The physiology of their bodies, hijacked to contain the image. The body becomes the camera, the eyeball, the lens. Initially, I performed Becoming an Image at the One Gay and National Gay Lesbian Archives at USC, which houses the largest collection of LGBTQ materials in the world. But like most museums and archives, this one is filled with the works of dead, cis, gay white men. My performance of this archive points to the evidence of queer and trans lives that are often missing from historical record. Missing, gone, lost. In 2019, at least 26 transgender or gender nonconforming people were violently killed, the majority of whom were Black transgender women. Over 130 transgender or gender nonconforming people were killed between 2013 and 2018. And according to the Human Rights Campaign, just as most of my performance is shrouded in darkness, the number of trans deaths may be even higher than the killing of transgender or gender nonconforming people is actually accounted for, because they often go underreported or misreported. The result of my performance is a series of bashed clay sculptures. The forms stand in for a history of silenced violence against trans people, marked with the imprints of fists, knees, elbows, sweat, and struggle. This performance points to the evidence. And in addition to these live performances, I also create photographic installations. At my recent solo show at the Institute of Contemporary Art in Perth, Australia, I asked the photographer to turn the camera back on the audience. The night after the performance, I worked late into the next morning creating site-specific wallpaper for the audience members' reactions of the live event. The performance photographs, taken blind and at random, are then hung over the audience members' wallpaper. So when the same people who came to the performance the night before come back to attend the exhibition the next night, they find their own eyes gazing back at them. This is my way of carrying forward the ethos and the red thread of an idea, which germinates in the live action into an installation, extending the work of those who are not present for the performance. Presenting the elements in this way, I triangulate the viewers, the performer, and the camera by folding their gaze into the work itself. I don't believe in the passivity of an audience. Nobody gets to stand on the sidelines. If you are a witness, it means that you too are present, alive, and accountable.
As artists, we want to bring this ethos forward, that art can help bear witness, but more than simply reflect back the horror of the current moment. It can also be a way of educating, a way of providing resources for change in another way. In the struggle against how do we collectively struggle for a better world? California is smoldering against the flames and toxic air levied by fire and the burning uprisings. We must summon the spirit of the late Black pioneering poet Toni Morrison, who prophetically wrote, "There is no time for despair, no place for self-pity, no need for silence, no room for fear. We speak, we write, we do language. That is how civilizations heal." So as artists, as students, as administrators and educators, we have our work cut out for us. Cassils and I came together to make a work about, as hundreds of thousands of Americans are protesting the policing of daily life, especially among Black communities and communities of color, immigration policy is moving in a notably dangerous direction. The system criminalizes, incarcerates, and deports people, separating families and loved ones forever, and depriving them of their own liberty.
Fairness, freedom, opportunity, and respect for human rights should be at the core of our immigration system, but our country isn't set up to uphold these values. Racism is at the root of many of our systems in the United States. Designed to strip people of their dignity, the US immigration system racially profiles and targets people based on the color of their skin. To quote one of our Skytyping artists, Patrice Cullors, co-founder of Black Lives Matter, she says, "One cannot say abolish ICE without saying defund the police." In the lead up to the launch, we created a video edited by Graham Colbins with music by Dorian Wood to promote the Skytyping performance, educate people about ICE detention, and build anticipation. We're going to drop that video in the chat right now. So if you could please watch it. It's about a little bit over a minute. We'll give you that minute to watch it and then come back and we'll proceed.
I see that you guys are not seeing the video in the chat. I'm not seeing the video link in the chat either. So I'm reaching out to Jess, who's supposed to load that video. Here we go. Video's in the chat.
So ICE detention is the practice of incarcerating people who are immigrants. From those who have just arrived to those who have lived in the US for years while they await the determination of their immigration status or their potential deportation. Detention is an integral part of the machinery of deportation. The federal government wastes more than $25 billion, these are of your tax dollars, every year on immigration and customs enforcement and on customs and border protection to profile, detain, and deport immigrants. Here are the relevant facts: that in 2019, ICE detained on average over 50,000 people a day. As of January 2020, 81% of people detained in ICE custody nationwide are held in facilities owned and managed by private prison corporations, which is a record high. Various reports detailing horrifying conditions inside these detention facilities, such as 300 people being held in a cell designed for 150 people, with no room to lie down or sleep, people being told to drink out of toilets. Many are without access to showers for periods sometimes exceeding 20 days. On October 24th, 2019, the ACLU reported that more than 5,400 children have been separated from their families at the Mexico border since 2017. Adults and children have been suffering and dying in taxpayer-funded facilities. And since 2003, there have been over 207 deaths in ICE detention, and this does not include the lives of children. You're muted, buddy.
On top of these brutal actualities are confirmed cases of COVID-19 within these facilities. Prompt action to release individuals from ICE detention is not only the just and moral course, but the most reasonable health intervention to prevent unnecessary deaths. It is against this backdrop that we came together to form In Plain Sight, a coalition of 80 artists co-founded by Cassils and myself, united to create an innovative poetic artwork dedicated to the abolition of immigrant detention and the United States culture of incarceration. But so how many detention centers exist in the US? Might want to take a guess. There's over 200 nationwide. Recently, over Independence Day weekend, IPS launched the nation's Skytyping fleets with a carbon offset plan to spell out artist-generated messages in water vapor, legible for miles. These messages were typed in the sky over detention facilities, immigration courts, borders, and other sites of historic relevance. Our goal was to visibilize the hundreds of detention facilities by launching a national Skytyping campaign, a spectacle where we could harness people's attention towards our website that functioned as a tool to educate and engage the masses to take action. Our strategy was to amplify, amplify, amplify. Three things: the calls to action for our coalition of 17 immigrant justice organizations, local bond funds used to get folks out of detention while they fight their case from the outside, and to vote. I want to ask everyone to use their vote and to consider this crime against humanity and the privilege it is to vote when millions of folks are without the ability to do so.
We targeted jails that hold ICE transfers, folks who have completed their entire sentence, but then get held after release and then fed into the immigration and customs enforcement machine. We targeted immigration courts. This is above the immigration court on Olive Street in Los Angeles. This is a phrase by Beatriz Cortez, the artist. No cages, no jalas. We targeted federal buildings. This is Bambi Salcedo, the founder of the Trans-Latina Coalition. This is her message: stop crimmigration now, over the LA field office. We targeted city halls. This is a city hall in San Diego, California, a message by Yunuen Rhee, which says, your tax dollars cage kids. This was, in response to the fact that San Diego is supposed to be a sanctuary city that protects immigrants, and yet here we are caging kids for money. We also chose historic sites of relevance, like former American incarceration, Japanese American incarceration camps. And this is a phrase that was chosen by Karen Isijuka, who is also, she's an artist, but she's also a founding member of Suru for Solidarity, which is an incredible group of Japanese American survivors of concentration camps who come together with a tagline that says, we wish to be the allies that we never had at the time. And so on the left, you see the image of her message as it was on the 3rd of July, and on the 4th, you see the Santa Ana racetracks in 1942, where her family members were incarcerated. We also chose border crossings. This is a message by Marcos R. Ramirez at the US-Mexican beach border. His message says, I am a cloud of hope. R's work is informed by a profound understanding of border culture. He explores issues of identity, race, and culture and community in a wide range of mediums, frequently delivering biting commentary. Instead of feeling half Mexican, half American, I feel double, he has said. As the plane soared, they made visible in the sky what is too often unseen and unspoken on the ground, the appalling, profoundly immoral imprisonment of immigrants. IPS broke through this wall of secrecy, using art as public engagement to expose and scrutinize sites of detention.
And the artists who participated in Plain Sight depict a vast array of ages, reflect established and emerging voices, artists who have been detained, undocumented artists, indigenous artists, artists descended from those who have survived Japanese American incarceration, the Holocaust, and the afterlife of the AIDS crisis. Though differing in subjectivities, in an act of solidarity, these artists came together to focus their attention on immigrant detention. Here are some other examples. Chinga tu migra by undocumented poet Yosimar Reyes. His skywriting was paired over the Los Angeles Metropolitan Jail. And Yossi said this about his statement: as undocumented people, we are taught to constantly be grateful for the opportunities this country gives us. Our labor goes without acknowledgement, and when we dare to declare how unjust the system is towards us, we are viewed as ungrateful. I am of a new generation of undocumented people who are exhausted from justifying our humanity. I am loud and proud, stand firm with dignity in declaring that my power is what has kept me here. Chinga tu migra is a curse on the dogs they send after us. We are undocumented magic. My message was written in Spanish, La Frontera nos cruzó, which translates into the border crossed us. And it invokes migration as a historically preceding the imposing structure and ideology of a border. It borrows lyrics from a popular song written by an indigenous metal band called Aslan Underground. We didn't cross the border crossed us.
This is Dred Scott's message. He's a performance and visual artist invested in abolishing white supremacy and uplifting racial justice work. And his message was dropped over Ellis Island, which is also home to the Statue of Liberty, which was a detention center until 1942. And Dred wrote of his phrase, which is a name, the name of Carlos Ernesto Escobar Mejia. He writes, "This is the name of the first immigrant to die in US detention from COVID-19. His death was absolutely unnecessary and preventable. To the leaders that run this country and to those who implement its laws, immigrant lives do not matter. In the streets around the country, demonstrators are boldly saying the names of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and many others. Remembering the name of Escobar Mejia both honors him as an individual and contributes to people's efforts to end the system that killed him. American immigration policy kills people. It kills people that ICE detains. It kills people crossing the harsh desert. It kills the people that it deports." And this was my message, which was placed over Geo Group headquarters in Los Angeles. With $3 billion in private prison industry, Geo Group is the nation's second largest for-profit operator. I am a Canadian-born artist, an immigrant, and a new citizen to the US, and Skytyping the words "shame" over the West Coast headquarters of Geo Group sheds light on the immoral intersection between for-profit immigration detention and the ways in which our governments have quietly profited from these immigration jails. I followed my phrase with Detention Watch Network's #defundhate. For too long, our representatives have said that they care about our communities while simultaneously funding aggressive immigration enforcement and deadly immigration jails. Cutting the flow of money is critical to stopping the anti-immigrant agenda.
In his artist statement, Kim Mockman writes, "Before colonial governments created borders to delineate their new nations and force First Nations into reservations, indigenous people migrated in all directions across territories, now known as Mexico, the United States, and Canada. These colonial demarcations on stolen land disregard indigenous title and impede the free movement of indigenous people on our own ancestral territories across Turtle Island. The detention and incarceration of migrants and removal of their children at the southern US border to enforce a colonial boundary is criminal, abhorrent, and intentionally dehumanizing." And so his phrase was actually written in Cree, and it's you see it represented in the slide in this graph that we handed out to artists so they could graph out how their message would be spelled out in the sky. The United Nations defines the forcible transfer of children from one cultural group to another as a genocidal act. In Canada and the United States, starting in the 19th century and continuing into the 1990s, Indigenous children were forcibly removed from their families and confined in residential schools, where they were abused and stripped of their languages and cultures. The resulting intergenerational traumas are manifest in many aspects of our communities, including the disproportionate incarceration of Indigenous people in Canadian prisons. This intolerable act at the southern US border is both devastating to witness and painfully familiar. We must encourage all Americans to have compassion for the families who are being ripped apart, for it is from Kisewa Tisawin that radical change begins. absolute compassion is what this statement reads.
So impact, what is an impact team? I certainly didn't know before starting this project, but it was something I discovered as we formed it. And our activation was distinguished by working with an engaged social impact team who specialized in community partner engagement. They worked with the boots on the ground and the organizers as we worked with the artists in the sky to make an artwork that ultimately served the missions of the immigrant rights advocates who have been doing this work so well, so long, for so many years. And as we did not want to make an artwork about immigrant detention, moreover, we wanted to use art to elevate the work of our partnering orgs. We asked ourselves, how can art pierce through the rhetoric to move people beyond the kind of political white noise into action? How could IPS educate folks about the stain of immigrant detention so that the country could learn more about who and how to help? So you can see here, this was kind of our flow to visibilize detention centers, to gain support for the movement, and then to abolish ICE detention centers.
And we worked with our lead impact producer, Seth Hernandez Ronquillo, a non-binary undocumented immigrant filmmaker and community organizer, and whose roots come from the Philippines. Their work is rooted in the belief that cultural strategies can propel political transformation. And to do this, directly impacted people must embrace the empowerment to tell their own stories authentically. We also worked with Lina Srivastava, who is a social innovative strategist working at the intersection of social action, interactive media, and narrative design. Lina has been involved in social engagement campaigns for several documentaries and has worked on strategic project design to a group of social impact organizations that include UNICEF, UNESCO, the World Bank, and FilmAid. We also worked with Becky Lichtenfeld, a human rights advocate, producer and director of social impact media for the Bertha Foundation, which supports forms of activism that aim to bring about change and champions those who use media, law, and enterprise as tools to achieve their vision.
The impact team was guided by the belief that media and the arts can play a vital role in the advancement of human rights. As the plane soared, we had 12 on-the-ground activations. That means like 12 different protests around the country. And as we flew over Mesa Verde Detention Center in Bakersfield, California, typing out Harry Gumbawa Jr.'s message, which was no ICE, no ICE, no ICE, those incarcerated had their yard time, and they too started to collectively chant, no ICE, no ICE, no ICE. There was a protest outside the detention center, and they too joined the chant, no ICE, no ICE. The sound of their reverberating voices reached the immigrants in solitary confinement who are being punished for starting a hunger strike in solidarity with the Black Lives Matter campaign. They too heard the chant, no ICE, no ICE, and this cemented their conviction to continue their struggle. Each Skytyped message was followed by a hashtag, which is hashtag XMAP. And upon searching on Instagram or the web, you would be driven towards our website, which is www.xmap.us. Here you would learn more information about the movement and how you could access an interactive map, which would tell you the nearest detention center to in your vicinity if you just entered your zip code. The website would also provide calls to action and other ways in which you could help change the lives of those who are immorally and unjustly detained. And it worked. Just to give you an idea of impact, a single Skytyped message over an urban center on a clear day reaches 3 million people. And with 80 messages in the sky, we brought this issue to 24 million people nationwide, and that's before social media. And then with the help of a robust PR campaign headed by Matisse Bustos Hawks and a growing presence of over 20,000 Instagram followers, which we started from scratch, we had over 150 pieces of press, over 100,000 shares on social media, and over 3.54 billion in readership from our recent action. We did use art to reach a lot and educate a lot of people.
And so to extend the message after the initial performance, we've employed many tactics. We're making a docuseries with director PJ Raval, who's an award-winning queer first-generation Filipino-American. PJ's outsider experience greatly shapes his filmmaking practice. PJ's work explores overlooked subcultures and identities within the already marginalized LGBTQ+ community. There's also an augmented reality app that we collaborated with called The Fourth Wall, which is a free augmented reality app That's a public art form exploring resistance and inclusive creative expression. The app is created by Nancy Baker Cahill and challenges traditional experiences of public art, especially in this moment where the country's historic monuments are being brought to task and toppled over. Our AR messages propose a new and engaging space and indexing places, highlighting histories and experiences oftentimes unseen and neglected. And so these messages will exist, currently exist over some of the detention facilities we flew over, but we hope to write them over every existing immigration detention facility in the country so that they'll permanently be visible through this AR app. And so we're upcoming, we have, we're not done. We still have tons that we're working on. We'll launch a new flight path in New Orleans, New York, and Los Angeles on days that will demarcate voter registration deadlines. One of the three calls to action of In Plain Sight has always been to vote. And so we know the system is far from perfect, but for those of us that can vote, we have to use our voice. We have to get out and vote.
We're going to end with a quote from an essay written by Lina Srivastava, our lead impact advisor, who wrote in her recent published article, "Radical Community is the Way to Counter the Populist Trumpian Spectacle." In a time of lockdowns and quarantines, in a time of fascism and propaganda, we need reason and action to be supported by grand visions of change. Both sides have this, but our vision is centered in love and community and relevant action, not fear and division. We simply do it better.
And then we'll also leave you with this other quote that's from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And it's actually regarding voting, which we know can sometimes be uninspiring or maybe make you feel like it's not enough. But it's so important we all show up for this November election and vote. I appreciate how Alexandria puts things in perspective when she says, it's important we continue our fight. Voting is a very critical, important element to making sure we are building power in our democracy. But it is not the only element. If all we are doing is voting, it is not going to be enough to change our world. We need to vote and. We need to vote and organize. We have to vote and uplift. We have to vote and educate. We have to vote and agitate. And so we want to encourage y'all to engage deeply in the ways you want to help bring change in this world. Join an organization, vote, protest. This is your right. Get active, y'all. We have little over 60 days before the election, so we have to go big. We have a lot of work to do. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cassils. Thank you, Rafa. What a tremendous presentation. We're going to open it up to questions now. So students, I'm asking you to put your questions in the chat, and then I will go through and select some. We've got a little time for questions. So we're getting a question. Have you ever received a direct answer after the flyovers from the people you were specifically targeting?
I mean, there's not a lot of ways of having direct correspondence, but we have, I'd say the most direct response we had was when we had that moment in Mesa Verde, when we had folks who witnessed the messages outside in their yard time, and they were able to look up and see those messages. But a lot of the time people are being held inside and they're not able to receive the messages. They might not be able to witness. We do have another initiative, which will be part of this second wave of our next sort of actions, which is to create a postcard writing campaign where we use some of the beautiful photographs that we garnered from the last performance. And we're initiating through different kind of cultural partnerships and organizations ways of creating postcard campaigns that will directly send messages to folks that are incarcerated and establish relationships back and forth with them. That's one way that we'll be sending the messages to the inside. But mostly what we worked with was the 17 partner orgs who, and also I should say that some of our artists, they themselves have been detained. And so they were very much thinking about, what would it be like for me to see a message in the sky? What message would I want to see? Whether those folks would be able to or not.
We have a few people that are asking similar questions concerning, did you get any pushback or any negative feedback, or were you ever contacted by a government official?
Yes.
Yes. Maybe I could talk about the being grounded, and you could talk about our website. So one of our artists, Devin Suno, his message was a phone number that was written in the sky in the Laredo border in Texas. And if you called that number, what you would hear was this recorded correspondence being read between someone that was detained and someone from the outside. And so someone called this number and reported it to the authorities, claiming that it had to do something with like people being smuggled. And so the authorities called the FBI, and our planes were actually grounded in Texas that weekend. And the Skytypers were interrogated and eventually let go, but it completely like interrupted that 4 days of like Skytyping, and actually the rest of the weekend made it really challenging for us to continue with our planned flying.
Yeah, we'd also created on our website on the day of, you could track the flights as they happen on a flight tracking app that flew over our interactive map. And through this flight tracking app, hackers were able to take the numbers of the flights, find out the pilot's information. And when those pilots grounded and were able to get cell signal, they had several threatening messages levied against them. And then finally, the main point of this project was, of course, to draw attention through this indexical property of putting this massive message in the sky that people could then see, and then drive attention towards a website, which would then educate you about detention centers and also what you could do. And so to stop this very effective action that we had taken, right-wing trolls targeted us several times in that first weekend. We had our site taken down several times, but lucky for us, Matt Dunnerstick, our basically the guy who was like completely behind our website, was able to mirror the website onto a proxy server such that the trolls started to attack what he called the sacrificial lamb. So we were able to mirror everything and proceed. But there were certain times during the height and the frenzy of the main action where they tried to take us down and take down our site very aggressively, which was, like it was like thousands of bots essentially. But luckily we had a good hacker on our side as well. So yeah, that was all very stressful. But we managed it, we managed it. We also had, there was many foibles, many things we had to push up against, but a lot of it is just kind of figuring it out, figuring out how you're going to press forward, how you're going to push back and keep going.
There's a couple of questions I'm going to combine here in relation to having Trump in office, and the questions are, has that influenced how you conceived of this project? And then how will the outcome of the coming election influence your progression with ICE protesting?
Well, we'll see. I mean, I think regardless, I think Angela Davis said it really well. I'm probably gonna I'm not gonna paraphrase this well, but essentially it's like, which candidate can we get into office that we can most likely put pressure on who will listen, right? And so either it will be really, really difficult, if not next to impossible, to have that kind of communication, or there will be more room for discussion to work with, so I believe we'll have to wait and see, I mean, that's really where we're at in in many parts of the approach to living in this country right now. Is it's very much a wait and see, and yeah, I don't have the answers as to exactly how that will proceed because we don't have a crystal ball, but we will be paying attention and listening to the folks that have been informing us. And essentially, as we said earlier, like we're not the ones that are making the decisions on this. We're simply like strategizing how to get the information out creatively. And so once those experts really dictate what they think the most appropriate course of action is, we'll be there to help amplify those actions.
Yeah. And to the question about Trump being in office, you know, immigration is not a new issue. I think something that was important for us to highlight was the cyclical nature of this violence, right? And Trump being the person in office now, who's, I would say, whose rhetoric is having very impactful ramifications. You know, I think in terms of just symbolically what his rhetoric generates, in terms of even like, you know, the examples that we brought up in our presentation, like these like prototypes of walls that are, you know, like very kind of like strategic gestures, you know, to embed these images of divisions amongst the masses, you know. I think the quote that Cassils left us with, Lena, talking about these counter spectacles, you know, I feel like there is a spectacle around Trump's rhetoric, 45's rhetoric. And so her call for these kind of like counter spectacles to be produced being necessary, I fully agree with. And I think that our project was working along those lines as well.
There's a few questions here regarding just the logistics of how do you get 80 artists together? How did you make this whole thing come about?
Yeah, it was really crazy. Like we had never attempted anything like this. You know, Rafa and I are both performance artists. You know, we work with like with our own, maybe with some collaborative aspects, but nothing of this scale before. But we felt that the size of the issue, you know, both of us, this being something that affected both of our lives in very different ways, but weighed heavily on us. And that feeling that so many of us have at moments when faced with this sort of paralyzing political rhetoric, you know, what do you do? You know, we really want to like, what can we do? How can we make something that not only gives us something to do, but can empower folks to make a difference? How do we do that? And we realized it required a massive undertaking. It needed to have that kind of scale for the same reason Rafa just mentioned, as a counter spectacle, you know, as something that could counter the blast of hatred and vitriol that we experience every day. And so we just did it. We just did a lot of admin. You know, we did a lot. I mean, COVID hit, and while other people were kind of, you know, learning to bake sourdough bread or something, like we were just, not to say that everybody was, but we had this project cut up for us. It was a ton of work. We had very small bare bones team. Everybody gave just like 2,000%, you know, and you know, this was much more than Rafa and I. Was Rafa and I and these artists, but then, you know, like 17 partner orgs and all, and then our impact team, and then our doc team. Like really, I'd say there was close to 300 or so folks that worked on this, pretty much at no pay for the most part, or very, very little pay. But simply because, you know, in this time of lockdown, it gave people something to focus on, where you felt like you were having all this sort of oppression, where you couldn't go outside, where you could, you know, thinking about someone in a cell being exposed to COVID, you know, thinking about your moment of oppression in relation to someone else's oppression, and then realizing that you actually still had something that you could do. And I really feel like so many people met us there, and just with that spirit, you know, helped us forward. This was a huge collective effort, and certainly it was a lot of work on our part, but it wouldn't have, you know, the gears wouldn't have been oiled without the labor of so many people.
Yeah, 100%. I think countless Zoom calls, never-ending email stream, but also just like people's willingness to embrace this project because of the sense of urgency behind it, because of the amount of on the ground work that's been done for decades. And I think as 2020 progressed, bringing on the pandemic and then the uprisings, it just kind of became that much more urgent. And so, yeah, I think it really happened with that kind of insistence and passion that Cassils talks about. You know, we had very little funding, not even like, we weren't even like close to having the funding to be able to get the planes off the ground in the sky. But our artists, activists and organizers that we were collaborating with were like, this is happening. Like we're working, we're gonna make this happen. There was just this level of determination that I feel like, you know, we didn't have like a single institution that was like sanctioning and supporting this project. Like Cassils like courageously like led the way when it came to like fundraising for this. And in a moment when I feel like every exhibition was canceled or postponed, we had this incredibly important project to like push forward. And we were able to, like, thankfully, like through like just like a lot of like blood, sweat and tears, just like a lot of fucking work that we put into this.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, you know, it was like not from the expected places, you know. We can't even tell you how many times we'd speak to well-to-do, like wealthy folks who would say there's like a million reasons I can't write you a check, you know, but then you'd speak to the Center for Cultural Power, which is an artist-run group, you know, of mostly like POC undocumented people. And they said, hey, we have some money, you know? So it was really like an amazing lesson in this moment where everybody is feeling like there's such a lack, like there's so little resources, that in fact, you know, it's really about going where it's warm and finding like-minded community and like-minded people that are on the same page as you. And that really, even with humble means, together we can really accomplish incredible things without the wealthy, without the anointment of massive institutions, you know. And that really, I don't know about you, Rafa, but it really taught me that lesson hard in a good way, you know?
Yeah, just turning to the leaders that were on our team that are amongst our like coalition of like grassroots organizations and national organizations, like, you know, having all of these leaders so present in this project really helped us propel it forward.
Okay, there are some questions more directed towards like what it is to do the art that you're doing personally. I would sum it up by saying, what advice would you give your younger self as an artist? And also second onto that is, what are some of the ways that you've been taking care of yourselves mentally in order to keep performing and making art?
I've dreamt of being an artist since I was like, it's like one of my earliest memories is telling my mom that I wanted to be an artist. And I think she imagined me being, because I was in Spanish, I told her I wanted to be an artista. And I think she imagined me being like a musician or like a Juan Gabriel or something. But in my mind, I always wanted to be working creatively with my body, with my spirit, and with my mind. And it's been an incredible journey to arrive to a place where I could collaborate with someone like Cassils and this incredible cohort of 80 artists, activists, and organizers. And beyond that, like the many artists that I've been able to collaborate through other projects. I guess I feel like I came into the sort of like contemporary art world, or felt like introduced to it like kind of later. And maybe I think just to be curious and to act on that curiosity instead of holding yourself back from fear is something that I would probably advise my younger self of. And in terms of taking care, just surrounding myself with like people that I love and people that love me. And I think transmitting that energy is so generative. It shouldn't be held in one place. And so, you know, if you work with people from that place, I think the workload feels less burdensome, less heavy. So just kind of like always engage with people through love and care, so that there's like less like self-care work that you have to do after. But definitely like just taking breaks from all of the media, social media, like the internet, and just surrounding yourself through phone calls, through like even like writing a letter, just being connected to those people that are gonna care for your spirit and hold you like in a good place always.
That's very good advice.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
You know, I would say, you know, for me, when I was younger, I don't think I saw a lot of representation of artists who looked like me. You know, like I certainly didn't see any representation of like trans masculinity or anything like that up until like many, many, many years later. And so I think that there's, you know, being an artist, you have the chance to create the visual language that you were lacking. You have the ability to imagine the world that you don't yet see around you. And rather than most people who just accept it, that this doesn't exist for me and so I won't have it, you actually get to build it for yourself. And so I would remind my younger self that I'm capable of building and being part of the building of that world making. And that as artists, that is what our job is to do, I believe. And in terms of care, you know, everything Rafa says is right. You know, surrounding yourself with love in a world that is, you know, really hell-bent on creating polarization and negative sort of interfacing. I think also being present in the body, you know, when we're in so much of these like floating head moments, when we're so tethered to our technology, the importance of grounding yourself, of learning to be present in your flesh, of checking in, of eating, of exercising, of sleeping enough, and of surrounding yourself with love, but also taking care of the package that is something that becomes so divorced from our spirit and our psyche, to take care of your body, because it is what is going to take us through and carry us forward as we do this difficult work. And how do we work and project outwards if we can't kind of fill the cup inwards? You know, so it's very difficult, but it's an ongoing process of trying to create balance and set sort of like limitations so that you can keep that balance. It's something that I'm always working on myself. Haven't quite managed it yet, but working on it.
You guys have been so generous. I want to just, we have so many questions. I'm just going to take two more, if that's okay.
Sure.
I think there's a few people wondering about how you guys got into performance art. It's new for many of our students, and they want to know, you know, what initially inspired you to try performance art.
So I had heard about performance art before I had actually seen it. I learned about it through a coworker when I used to work at a hardware store. I worked there for like 10 years. And I remember being in the break room and reading like art books for school. And my coworker started bringing in these really amazing like sketches, which I later found out were made by a member of ASCO, which is like a like superheroes of mine. They're this collective of artists that did performances here, based here in East LA. And so I had like this sort of, I had the idea and an imagination of like what these performances look like. But I think for me, performance came from like just being very disillusioned with painting and drawing, which is what I was like working with for nearly a decade. I think it was, for me, performance was like this, I was trying to work through some very like personal stuff that was dealing with like, had to deal with my queerness and my relationship to community and family. And drawing and painting were just not pushing me through this other end to the other end. And performance became this sort of embodied way of kind of like reevaluating my relationship to community and family and to spaces that I felt like disenfranchised from because of my queerness. And so, yeah, it literally was just like this sort of, and to this day, it's how I practice it. I feel like it's an embodied way of learning, like your relationship to a place, a person, a thing. I've learned through performance that it's like the best way that I learn is by doing it, is by experiencing it. And it's also an incredible vehicle to create access. You know, your artwork is where your body exists. And so it's this really radical kind of like presence that you could create if you can make work with your body.
Yeah, I mean, I think me too, I was trained as a painter. And I always, my whole life, grew up drawing obsessively, but not knowing anything about contemporary art, you know, just sketching like crazy and then wanting to go to art school, going to art school and ending up kind of accidentally at this art school in Eastern Canada, which had been during like the late 60s, the sort of place where a lot of New York conceptual artists draft dodged, who didn't want to fight in the Vietnam War. They escaped to Canada and they set up this like completely insane conceptual art school where literally you'd go to a nude drawing class and Michael Fernandez would have like the nude model jumping on a trampoline as the students were trying to sketch, you know? So I went from this like really, you know, this is what art is. It should be this painting, it should be drawing, it should be representational, to very quickly seeing all these like kind of really experimental people who are working in this university type setting, but kind of disobeying all the rules. And it was really exciting. And although I do love certain sort of aspects of like form and the way that you can evoke emotion when you really master form, there's something that is incredibly visceral and physical and immediate about liveness, especially in this moment where we don't engage with each other. And I mean, even pre-COVID, you know, like when everybody's on their box, like what is it to be in a room where we share space, where we inhale each other's pheromones, when we're pressed up against each other? There's a sort of intimacy that is almost taboo at this moment in time, you know, to remove your clothes, to be vulnerable, to bear flesh, to bear witness, to be present. I feel like performance offers us this kind of this real access point to be truly present. And for me, that's like, that feels as synonymous to when I feel in my purest form of creating, if that makes sense. And so it felt like kind of like a magnet to go that way. And so I've just been pursuing that because it feels like a natural progression.
Thanks, those are great responses. You guys, if students want to get involved, how should they do that in plain sight or in political work or activism in art?
I'm gonna drop some links. Some of them I've already put earlier in the chat. This is a link to our Take Action tab on our website. You'll find links to calls to action from our partnered organizations. And then there's like all of these incredible organizations on Instagram accounts that y'all should follow, get to know them, get to know their work, learn about their platform, their various calls to action. They're tied to like a broader network of folks that are fighting for justice for immigrant folks on various levels, not just detention. So those are these are like good places where maybe you could start.
Yeah, and
oh,
yeah, and vote. You know, that's a major one. When I last taught at Syracuse in 2016, I was teaching during the semester when the elections occurred, and I was kind of really surprised to find out the day after the election that a lot of my students hadn't voted, and I was like, why didn't you vote? And they were like, well, I was like 8 years old when Obama came into office, and their political consciousness, of course, wasn't developed at 8, and they just thought it would always be that way. But we now know, 4 years later, only 4 short years later, how quickly that pendulum shifts and how important it is. Even though we're made to feel like that the system fails us, it's almost like they want us to believe that so we don't activate it even more. So vote and activate and do your part for those who can't.
Yeah. There's
Great.
millions of folks that can't vote, y'all. So it's a privilege. Use it. It's a tool. Just use your voice. Get out and vote.
I do want to also say that if any of you guys, students in the audience there, if you're looking for another class and you'd like to continue this dialogue with Cassils, they're teaching with Jess Posner, who introduced this evening, and that class is on Mondays. It's in the chat here. Jess did post it to everyone. It's AIC 321-621, so it's an undergrad and grad level course. And it's Mondays, 9:30 to 12:30.
Yep. We're going to be digging deep, y'all. Thank you so much.
I was just going to say, if anyone has any questions, you can email me. It's jlposner@syr.edu. Happy to answer them or connect them. And I just wanted to shout out to everybody on YouTube. We had a really awesome, active group of people over there. So know that y'all are loved, and we've got people joining us from all over the world right now. So thank you so much, Cassils and Rafa and everyone, for your beautiful questions and presence tonight.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jess. Thank you, Holly.
Thank you, guys.
Take care.